And now on Nights with Steve Price from the 50UP Club, Christopher Zinn.
Yes, indeed. Christopher has written an open letter to the new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who looks like today having a 77-seat win in the election, which gives him a fairly comfortable majority. Written him an open letter from a sprightly 61-year-old. Are you using me as your example?
Well, no, I mean, he is actually 61, Malcolm Turnbull. I know he doesn't always look it, but he is well in the demographic of the 50UP Club. In fact, he might even be a member. I know you need to do a check through the rolls or whatever.
Because you know I am.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly invite him to be, because I think, he's always interested in finding out about how markets work, and I think we could do that.
They managed to get themselves a working majority, which is good news for the country, but they're going to have to deal with a fairly disparate group of people who make up the Senate. Now, a number of the people in that Senate have, in fact, flagged that they agree with you and I on some of these issues, including some doubts over the superannuation changes. Would that be reform number one or debate number one that you'd like to have with the new PM?
I think it certainly is. I mean, there can be no other subject that is perhaps of more important to people in the age cohort than superannuation. And while there were some policy moves that would make it fairer and top up the balances of those at the bottom, and that can only be a good thing, there's certainly a big issue in the middle. And while the Treasurer and the Prime Minister at the time claimed it was only top 4% of the super rich who were affected, more and more people are realising that the actual caps they had in terms of the non-concessional contributions you could make over a lifetime, and if it wasn't or wasn't respect, have created so much doubt that, in this letter I've just asked Mr Turnbull, at the very least, to, not just push back on those who are seeking consultation, but actually to engage with them and actually sell this policy a lot better than many of his colleagues did in the campaign, when, frankly, they didn't understand it.
Judith Sloan, who I've got great respect for, who writes in The Australian, I think she writes with great clarity, made some really good suggestions on how to fix this. And with paraphrasing it, but what she's saying is, look, these caps and both the caps you've got, the $1.6 million and the $500,000 lifetime, are too low. Bring them up, put them to a more realistic figure, stretch your date on implementation out, get rid of the retrospectivity, and you might, in fact, get some co-party partisan agreement on super changes.
Yeah, and it would make it so much easier. And again, I think people are prepared to have some changes. It's been broadly acknowledged that the concessions right at the top end perhaps did need some tempering at the very least, but it's the way it happened really as a sort of dictatorial fiat even, that, you have it, take it or leave it, that really, particularly for those who are active in the Liberal Party, it seems, and weren't prepared to put their votes to the Liberals in the upper house and weren't prepared to volunteer, hand out how-to-vote cards, etc. That is something that's really come close to home for them. And I think hearing Senator Abetz on the radio this morning, they're certainly going to convey that to the First Party Room meeting at the beginning of next week.
Yeah, on Monday. And the thing about that is that they do have to put their hand out, reach out to the Conservative arm of the party. This is the perfect vehicle, the superannuation changes, to do that with. You're not going to cop too much flack from anybody about doing that. I mean, you're going to get some people criticise you for undoing some of the budget repair, but the numbers on repair are not big. And so you do that, you keep the Conservatives happy, you get the people back inside the tent for the next time you have an election, and we move on. What about the question of more work for older workers and making it easier for people to employ older workers and for older workers to keep their jobs?
Exactly. And look, we mentioned this before, but again, with the polls that we do in the 50UP Club, it's really access to work. The issue around work discrimination for older workers is right up there. And just before the campaign began, Susan Ryan, who's the outgoing Age and Disability Discrimination Commissioner, gave a very interesting report, Willing to Work. Many recommendations. The one which I thought was particularly interesting, there was a longevity minister, which is basically someone who can address so many of the issues that we talk about week in, week out, and really frame the fact that there is an ageing population not as some cost, but as a benefit. And one of the benefits which an ageing population can do is extending their working lives, giving them access to work, allow them to, to contribute meaningfully to society and enjoy, the dignity which work brings as well. So I think that's a kind of a key area, and again, it was pretty silent in the campaign. So we're hoping to see some action in that area.
Some of the most or the highest fixed costs that older Australians have, particularly those living on fixed incomes, self-funded retirees, are health insurance, which everybody wants to keep, private health insurance if they can, and energy costs. There wasn't a lot of discussion at all this election. 2013 was the power price, the energy price, the electricity price election. Not much mention of it this time round. What can we expect, do we think, from a rebooted Turnbull government on things like health insurance and energy?
Look, health insurance, there's been various inquiries looking into health insurance, although there wasn't much talk through the campaign, apart from the Labor Party seeking to withdraw the rebate from what they call junk insurance. But that's just another way of actually shifting more cost for consumers. So-called junk insurance does suit some people who choose to have a very bare-bones policy, although probably not older people who would realise that they're better off actually having a more comprehensive policy. So, look, there's a lot to happen around private health insurance, and I think we've just got to ensure that the consumer's interests are paramount there, because the industry, be that the medical industry or the health insurance industry, are very adept at getting their own way and actually leaving us somewhere down the chain when it comes to that.
One of the few states we're not on air in is South Australia. They pay the highest energy costs, probably followed by Tassie, but of the main states where we are on air, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, electricity prices seem to be on the move. We've seen the local state price regulators seem ad hoc just to whack up particularly electricity, but also you've got to think of water and gas. Is there anything a federal government can do to put a halt on that?
Well, look, this, in terms of electricity, yes, because there is a national electricity market, and the feds do have an interest in that, and the market is meant to have as one of its goals the long-term interests of consumers. And again, that has been a very contested phrase as to what that means and what it doesn't. So, again, I did hear the Prime Minister in the run-up in South Australia being asked about electricity prices, and there wasn't really very much that he had to offer. But they have to realise that this is a key cost of living issue to people right around the country. Feds, where they can't, there is leadership that they can provide. And certainly when it comes to, issues around renewables and other goals, that does put costs. Maybe some of that is already mandated, but it's a question of explaining what it is and why it is, and giving people the wherewithal to, cope with it and adapt to that over time. And again, it seems that there is a lot of confusion and disconnection from that. And when I say disconnection, actually people really being disconnected because they can't pay their bills.
Good on you. Always a pleasure to catch up, Christopher. I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Christopher
Bye.
Zinn from the 50Up Club.